And boom.
Hi, this is Rod Collins, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Ken decided to stay. Makes me smile, and it's obviously makes me smile to have Rod Collins on the show. Rod, thanks for coming on the Break It Down show. I can't wait to chat with you. I guess maybe as a point of introduction, give everybody an idea of who Rod is and what he does. And I'm going to put your website up, so anybody who wants to read up on Rod while we're talking, you'll have that resource as well. It'll be right there below Rod's handsome visage. Go ahead, Rod.
Okay, well, these days I'm an author and a songwriter. And there's a friend of mine who says the nice part about retiring is you work at what's fun. And those are the things that are fun for me. And I've published 3 books over the last decade or so. The most recent one is called Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. And it talks about a very different management model that most people have never experienced. And I've had the opportunity to use it within a former corporate context with immense success. And it's a counterintuitive model. And I'm sure as we go through our conversation, we'll get into the details more so. And I'm also applying that model now. I'm working on my next book, which is going to, the premise of it's going to be before we build AI, what we're calling artificial intelligence, which I think is actually a poor name for the product we're building, we better understand how human intelligence works. So, and right now, I think that there's a lot for us to learn about human intelligence before we're going to be able to build a successful computerized model. And this organizational model has a lot to do with that issue.
Yeah. Good. It's excellent. The understanding that AI is sort of a look. My blender. If I push the margarita button, hey, margarita, right? But
Yeah.
does that mean it's smart, or is it just doing a function? You know, I've got one of them fancy smoothie. Okay, great. Is that AI? No, of course not. And so when we have a machine that's a large language model, this comes from our buddy Brad Hutchings, and it's picking the next most likely token and will stop when the stop token comes out and it's like, oh, I'm shutting up now, then that's not the thing that we think it is. And it's certainly not chatting with us. It's not capable of lying to us. It's also not capable of telling the truth.
There's a lot of issues we need to handle. And believe it or not, I think the solution for building a highly benevolent and effective AI system is to build it in the context of this alternative organizational model. So maybe it might be helpful. Let me tell a little story that everybody can relate to on a place that did adopt this different organizational model. And the question I would have for our listeners are, have you ever wondered why we don't have very many commercial air crashes anymore? Now, I'm old enough to remember when we averaged about 3 to 4 per year in the United States. And in the early 1980s, that dramatically changed. What happened? Was it better machines? No. It was a better organizational model. You see, there was a crash in the late 1970s. It was a United Airlines flight. And what happened was the pilots had run out of fuel. And the plane crashed. And the reason they ran out of fuel is the captain got overly myopically focused on the right landing gear problem. They weren't sure whether it was locked or not. And as the NTSB investigators were listening to the pilot tapes, they were just stunned. How can a crew of 3 pilots run out of fuel and crash a plane? Didn't make any sense until they listened to the tapes. And they realized that the command and control management model was the problem. The other 2 pilots knew there was an issue, but they had no way of getting through to the captain because the captain was the primo person in the cockpit. And they realized that has to change. What we have to have going forward is anybody can speak up, anybody can challenge anybody. And if the other 2 pilots in this instance if one of them had just said, Captain, we're running out of fuel, we got to get this plane down now, forget about the gear, they could have had a safe landing instead of losing the lives of 10 people, which they did in that crash, including one of the pilots. And so United Airlines quickly adapted the new model, and the other airlines followed suit. And so the reason that we have greatly reduced commercial airline crashes is not better machines, it's a new management model. And the new management model is the decentralized peer-to-peer network model. And the reason it's superior is because anybody can challenge anyone, the unconscious biases of the person in charge don't get amplified. And that was what was happening in that cockpit. The other two pilots couldn't get through to the captain because they couldn't challenge the captain's authority. And the captain was just overly biased on fixing one problem instead of the complex situation that they had to manage. And the other thing that happens in peer-to-peer networks is, and this inspired the title of the most recent book I wrote, Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody, is when you combine the knowledge of everyone, you wind up creating solutions of coming up with ideas that no one of you could have ever come up with by yourselves. And this is the beauty of the network model, is because everybody can contribute, everybody's voice counts, nobody can shut anybody down. Then you are able to bring better ideas to solving the problem. And that's really important in this time of rapid change. Organizations that are able to bring the best thinking of everyone forward as quickly as they can are going to be smarter organizations.
Love that. That's great, man. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, would I be incorrect in saying that this is more of a collaborative leadership type of style versus a hierarchical, pyramid with somebody on the top? It's almost like we're inversing it, that pyramid, and having a broader spectrum.
That's exactly right. And the key thing is no one's in charge. No one controls. And in the book, I highlight 3 companies that have been following this management model for decades. All of them are market leaders. None of them have ever had any bosses. No one can tell anyone what to do or you'll lose your job. All things have to be decided by the groups. And it's somewhat counterintuitive, and I can hear the voices of people listening now. If nobody's in charge, how is anything going to get done?
Right.
Well, these 3 companies, where no one is in charge, they actually get things done faster. I mean, look at it. Bureaucracies are the slowest human animals in existence. You don't have these issues when you work in a network structure. And people on the team will be aware of, there'll be some people on the team who will be aware of timing requirements. And they'll be reminding people of that in order to get the job done. It does sound counterintuitive, but it's actually a smarter and faster model.
So I'd follow up on that and ask this. Pete and I come from some similar backgrounds. Very much from a hierarchical structure, being in the military. I've worked in a hierarchical structure in law enforcement and emergency services also. Is this model suited for those types of situations where an incident is occurring and it requires immediate action, or is it better suited for something that's more of a strategic type of decision-making process for how are we going to capture more market share, or how are we going to bring this product to market? How does that interplay for these different types of organizations?
That's a great question. One of the places that has implemented this is the military. And it was done in Middle East warfare. And I tell a story in the book about General, I think it's Stanley McChrystal, is wondering, why is this nomad, that they're running into with the Arab fighters, with the Islamic fighters? Why are we having such a hard time? And he recognized, if we're going to beat a network, we have to be a better network. And so he retrained his troops so that once they're in the situation, that they would be able to work as teams, responding to situations in real time, following this model. And that's when they were able to get the upper hand. He recognized it took a network to beat a network. And it may not be operating that way in the Pentagon, which is very bureaucratic, But I believe when you go out into the field and where the soldiers are actually doing the work, you will find that they are some of the best examples of the effectiveness of this model. And it makes sense because wins and losses are not measured in dollars, they're measured in lives. And so when your life is on the line, that's even more valuable when money is on the line. So no, it can apply to any situation, just about every situation. Does this mean that we don't have hierarchical structures anymore? No. Do you need police forces in society? Yes. There are times where coercive power is appropriate, but it shouldn't be the dominant form of power. One of the differences between networks, and perhaps the biggest difference between networks and hierarchies, is in how power works. People quote the saying from Lord Acton that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, he's half right. Coercive power corrupts, and coercive power corrupts absolutely. But in networks, you don't have coercive power because no one has command authority over anybody else. And so what you wind up with is a very different form and a more powerful form of power, which is synergistic power. You replace power over with power with. What happens when power is about power with? Some interesting things. One, nobody feels powerless in an organization where power is about power with. It's interesting. They find that 2/3 of employees are disengaged from work. 2/3 of employees don't have management responsibilities. I wonder if there's a correlation. In the organizations that I write about in the book, there aren't any powerless people. And the only way that you can build power is not by getting charge of people, it's by working with them and creating things. Because if you can't create things, if you can't get things done, then the business isn't going to survive. And everyone feels responsible for it. That's another thing about power with. Everyone feels a sense of responsibility. And the need to get things done becomes the driver to work as quickly as you can in the context of the market speed in which you have to operate.
When we look at there's a concept called mission command, and that kind of addresses this, where you have, in the military, the commanders like, we have options for you, sir, A, B, and C. They're distinct options, each of them. And the boss says, we're going option C. And the staff goes, oh, no, I mean, yes. And then we all pull on the rope hard as we can to make sure that we follow the commander's point of direction. We had Stan McChrystal on the show, and we've talked a lot about this in terms of like my being on the ground and how I impact his decision making all the way at the top, right? And so we have that thing. But within that mission command is like Pete is going to act as his own agent on the ground to do what he determines is the right thing, because Stan can't know everything. And so I do have it's the compression of authority, right? So the authority is pushed down to the lowest level, so I can do the thing that needs to be done in front of me. And if I need to make option C the right option for the commander, it might be that I have to take a totally different approach to that from what they drew up on the board. How am I doing?
I think, yeah, it's spot on. You're pointing out what is the role of a leader in this context, and I think you've just given a good direct. It's to make sure everyone's clear about the goal. What is it what's the goal we have to accomplish? And there are leaders in networks. They just don't have the ability to shut off your voice. And people are looking to the leaders in this context. Let us be clear about the goal. Now, once we're clear about that, and the two of you, I think, have military backgrounds. The plan changes almost the first minute the encounter occurs, but the goal remains the same. And in that context, the people who are actually doing the work are in the best position to adjust the tactics to best fit the goal. They're also discovering things we didn't plan for necessarily. We may have trained for them, but we haven't planned for these specifics. And by having this, by the teams having power with, and one of the things you hear when you listen to the voices of of military performers is they have an extremely good concept of the importance of teams. They know that they're not going to survive just by themselves. They call each other brothers, and they feel that intensely. Why? Because they've got this incredible sense of team. So if the leaders have laid out the goals and made that clear, and the teams have the camaraderie, the sharing of the power with, then they have the capacity in real time to respond to situations and the changing circumstances while at the same time keeping the eye on the goal. And the leader's job is to make sure that the conversations are happening across the teams to the fullest extent possible. I recall when I wrote about General McChrystal's story, one of the things he had these daily conference calls where lots of people could participate. And what that did was just create this tremendous sense of clarity around what it is we want to accomplish. And that became part of his discipline. And that's another important thing the leader has to do. Don't hide information. You expand as much information out there as you possibly can, because that helps people to better react to the changing circumstances. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I hear some echoes of what I've learned and call servant leadership in some of the stuff you're saying. How does servant leadership, which I've tried to adopt as a model in leadership, and that's something that's evolved over a period of time, not anything I was specifically taught or experienced, but are those echoes there? And how does servant leadership and being a servant leader play into this type of organizational model?
Of what calls servant leadership there. I use a different word, but it's a similar word to servant. I think you're a facilitator. Leaders and networks are facilitators. And what does a facilitator need to do? One, make sure there's clarity around the goal. If you don't know what your goal is, you don't know what you're doing, and you'll have a goat rodeo. And nobody wants to participate in that. The second thing is we have to be clear about what are the rules of the network. And the leader needs to make sure everybody's being heard, especially those who seem to be ignored. When I practiced this discipline in a corporate context, I would get a microcosm about business in the room because I didn't think it was enough for just top leaders to be thinking things through. I wanted a microcosm of the whole organization. So anybody affected could jump up and say, wait a minute, you can't do that because it affects this. And I remember many times being surprised. It affects you? How? I had no idea. And then once they articulated it, it was like, oh, and everybody else in the room understands. So now we realize that there was a blind spot that suddenly got uncovered. And as we would come to solutions, I would ask the group, is there anyone here who thinks that what we're going to do is tragic? It may not be your first choice. If it's not your first choice, but it's going to work, let it be. But if you're sitting there knowing they're going to fail, but, I really don't want to come forward and challenge the group, I would tell the group, you have a responsibility to come forward. And my responsibility is to make sure we safely hear you. And most times when people would speak up and express their concern, people would say, oh, we're not doing this, we're doing that. They'd say, I'm fine. But it was very powerful. Every once in a while, somebody would say, well, I really think we have the problem if we do what we're thinking of doing, and here's why. And everybody would react and go, oh my goodness, we didn't see that. And what you're doing is by honoring all voices and not just going ahead for the sake of going ahead, but making sure we're going to do this right. And it really conveyed to the people, they got a real sense of, wow, they're really serious when they say your voice matters, because we could have moved on, but we didn't. And they made sure that this one person got fully heard, and it made it safe for others to begin to speak up. And once that safety exists, and I call it facilitator, because a facilitative leader is not a weak leader. It's just that leader does not impose their point of view on the group, but rather helps the group to come up with its best intelligence. And that leader recognizes that what the group came up with is better than I could have come up with or that any single individual could have. And you want the people walking out of the room not thinking of the leader, but thinking of themselves. Because you want them walking out of the room not focused on the power over from the person who led the meeting. You want them focused on the power with that they found with each other. Because that saves you in a corporate context. It saves you dollars, it saves you time, and it drives quality. I used this model for 10 years in a very complex business context, and everything we did using it was on time, on budget, high quality. That's the power of power with.
That's great. One of the concepts we discussed earlier when Ken and I were talking about counterintelligence was cultural intelligence. And one of the things I've learned about CQ is in a business setting or a combat setting or whatever it is, it's very easy to think I'm going to build this culture, but culture hates design. It just loathes it. And so if you're working and you're the leader, your job is to be uncomfortable with a lot of things at one time. And so if your path is A to B and you're trying to design a culture that allows that path, that is a harder path than to say, let's see how we figure this out, and being open to the input of the other people who may have a path that doesn't make sense to you, but you don't need an arrow. You need a windy path to get to the thing. It's the actual critical path. And so if I can withstand the cultural lack of comfort, what I call miscomfort, not discomfort, miscomfort, I can get there. I'll get to comfort, but right now I don't understand it. And I can accomplish my goal reliably and repeatedly. I no longer care what the path is because I'm getting from A to B, and then I can attune that path into something that makes more sense. But if I start with, I'm going to establish a culture, well, I've taken on a task that's almost impossible because culture just doesn't abide that kind of design.
You know, what you bring up is a very, very important point. One of the things that would happen, I called these sessions, I would hold 2-day sessions when we had very difficult problems to address. I called them collective intelligence workshops because that's what we're going to aggregate their collective intelligence. And something would happen in these that is very contrary to what happens in your typical corporation. Most business leaders are afraid of chaos. And at the first moment they see chaos, they want to kill it. And they'll give you some form of clarity of intention, but they pay a price for it. And the price is they never discover what they don't know that they don't know. Now, one of the things that would happen in these workshops is as we had different perspectives and we had places where different perspectives could come out, you could feel the chaos in the room rise. You could feel the sense, we thought we had a problem when we walked in here, but my goodness, the problem is even worse than we had anticipated because we're starting to discover things we didn't know. And if I felt the energy in the room, the energy of chaos was high enough, I would call a break and I would look at the people and say, does everyone in this room right now feel a tremendous sense of chaos and a sense that we're never going to solve this problem? It's far worse than we thought. And I would see all the nodding heads. And again, this is where the leader's role is different. And I would say, good, you're exactly where we need you to be. Because every project has 2 phases. I don't care what business you're in. And that phase is order and chaos. Bureaucracies always choose the order first, which is why they get the chaos at the end. We're doing it differently. Now take a break. Come back in about 30 minutes. I always had 30-minute breaks to give people time to do what they wanted to do, because when they come back, I wanted them in the room. But I also wanted informal conversations going on. I knew there'd be a couple people in that session who would begin thinking and so forth. And when we would come back after a half hour, inevitably somebody would say, I was thinking about this. And what it is now chaos was a bridge to a higher level of intelligence and a better place from which to come solutions. And after about maybe 60, 90 minutes of discussion, as chaotic and as discouraged as they felt earlier, their sense of, we're going to tackle this thing, we're going to win this thing, 90 minutes later was terrific. We would have never gotten to that point if we didn't embrace the chaos. And that's something that most bureaucratic leaders avoid at all costs. And you pay a tremendous price for it.
So then how do you develop that in, especially in younger staff or younger leaders, to be able to participate and speak honestly in that kind of stuff? In the military, one of the things that we always saw was if the commander was going to go around the room, most of the time he'd go to the most junior person first and ask them to speak up and get their opinions so that it wasn't swayed or affected by what their boss thought or what their boss said. Hear from the most junior level person first. I had the opportunity early in my post-military career to clerk at the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. And Judge Al Lance was the same way. And he'd go around the table and we'd be discussing a case or an issue. He'd go to the most junior clerk first before he went to his chief of staff to hear. So how do you, is that a way to development, or is there a better way to develop these younger leaders or younger participants and feeling comfortable in speaking out, even though it may not jive or align with what the more senior members of the group think?
I think what you've described is an effective way to do it. I think another way to do it, and I would use this occasionally, because remember, I've got a microcosm of the business in the room. So I have senior executives and people we hired out of college two weeks ago in the same room with the same voice. Have them write their ideas on Post-it notes, everybody at the same time, and then throw the notes up on a wall. And one of the reasons I would do that is to disassociate ideas from people, because you don't know, as you're talking about the Post-it note, where the idea came from. And then as these ideas are up there, if you begin to see a lot of people had this same idea, we'll begin to group the ideas. And I think one of the responsibilities of the leader is to make sure that we don't have a hierarchy of processing the ideas, because the best idea could come from somebody. The best idea may come from somebody who's not even in the discipline. All right. I mean, think about it. The airplane wasn't invented. It was invented by two bicycle mechanics. All right. Who just, they just came at it. All the experts couldn't crack flight. And two bicycle experts did it because they thought differently. And what you want to do, another role of the leader is the leader wants to combine the thoughts of the experts and the non-experts, because you need them both. The experts know everything about the past and the present to the nth degree, but oftentimes it's the non-experts who see a different future. The biggest name in broadcast media today should be Blockbuster, not Netflix. Why? Because Netflix offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for a mere $50 million if Blockbuster would let them build a streaming capacity. But the experts at Blockbuster, and they were experts at the time, said streaming will never affect our business. We have stores and we sell DVDs, and that's what we do. Two things. One, if the CEO didn't have the authority to make that decision by themselves, the biggest name today would be Blockbuster. Okay, if a group had to make the decision, because no single individual could do that, they could have proceeded differently. And what they wound up passing up today, I believe the last I saw, Netflix is worth $400 billion. They could have had it for $50 million, and Blockbuster could have been a $400 billion corporation. All right. So you never know where the ideas are going to come from. And the innovation always looks different from what you're doing now. And that's one of the big transitions. To me, the great transition a business has to make is to go from one product model to another. Netflix has been able to do that. They don't send DVDs to your home anymore. That was their business at one point. They're now making movies. You have to have this idea that tomorrow may be very different from the past. So you want to be combining the experts and the non-experts. And oftentimes, too, you may have to set up a different team. I can't remember the context, but I was listening to a podcast the other day where somebody said that we needed to build a future. So I took a group of people and I took them out of the organization and I put them aside because I knew the organization would kill anything that they came up with. And they would wind up killing our future. And so I care about the long-term future of this company, and I'm not even sure what it's going to be. I just know it's going to be different. And that's also an important responsibility as CEO. You don't know everything, and be honest that you don't, because that honesty invites the innovation that's going to help you to create your future and to continue to preserve your company, but it may look very different.
That's great, man. I'm going to add a couple things that sort of follow along what you're talking about. We often in the military will partner up with another partner. So we're in Afghanistan and we have these governors and we're desperate for them to govern in the way we want that. And we'll do things and we'll yank them by the arm and do a thing called like a rotation of the battlefield and be like, you need to go engage with your constituents. And so we will force them, we will compel them to go do this. We will compel them to do these projects. We never ask them, hey, how do we help the farmers? Right? We just say, we're going to build these huts. People are going to put their fruit in there, and that's how they're going to sell their stuff. During the harvest, we're going to build a dam. But it's the harvest. We're going to build a dam during the harvest. We do these things. And so we're also going to rebuild the bazaar, right? And it's this mud hut bazaar area. And the Taliban says, no, you're not going to build a bazaar, right? And we're way off the main route. And so we kept briefing this to ourselves. We have this mighty push, multi-unit, multi-year, still no bazaar. And so instead of just saying, hey, slow down, why aren't we getting a new bazaar here? We just kept pushing forward. I'm doing my job. I go in and I talk to the governor. And he's like, let me take you on a walk down what the bazaar will look like. So I'm in the area where the bazaar is, not pictures, the actual bazaar. And it's just mud huts. And he walks and he's like, there goes the Luby's Steakhouse. There goes the Hilton. There goes right there. And then Craig's going to have a mechanic shop. That's where the bus stop's going to. He pointed it all out. It was all in his head. And so I took the time to extract it from his head. And it's not a one-day thing. It's a multi-week thing. I had to build the trust. He had to understand what he was telling me was going to be communicated in a way that the Army would accept and not kill him. Because you're always worried about that because the Army kills people sometimes. And so we got this totally new view of what the bazaar looks like. And I'll say one more thing and then I'm going to shut up. During the time that I was slowly teasing all of this out, because I didn't understand what I was doing either. It was chaos. We had a general come out to our little area and it's way off the beaten path. And he's waving his arms all around out in the bazaar area. It's going to be the best bazaar ever. And he was so irrelevant. Here's this person that has peak performance. They've reached the top of their field. They're highly in charge of things. And they couldn't have been more detached from what reality was. And I think this echoes a lot of what you've talked about. And the answer was really follow what this person's plan was because they had a plan. We're trying to build up a government, but we're going to dominate the government and tell it what to do. And then people don't connect to that government, strangely enough.
I mean, what you're describing there is you're going to put in place a command and control structure.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems in the corporate world, and I'm sure you run into it in the military world, is an over focus on expanding control. And what the network is not focused on expanding control. The network is focused on expanding the consciousness of as many people as we can. And I don't mean consciousness in a spiritual sense. I mean it in an understanding sense. The more people understand, the better. And the understanding, we talked about, you have to know what the goal is. Everyone's got to be clear about that. And that is, that is where the leader may wind up defining the goal, or it may make sense for the team to define the goal. Different circumstances will call for different things. The second thing that teams need is, what are the most important things? And I think this is especially important in the military context because life and death is on the line. And I'll tell you, the vast majority of people working in corporations don't know what the most important things are to get their goal done. They just know what their tasks are. And they may not even be sure how the tasks necessarily connect. And when you don't know how they connect, you can't adapt. Because adaptation requires you to understand connections. One of the things I noticed in our collective intelligence workshops, I mentioned we would have people put ideas on notes and so forth, and we would cull them down. Once we saw, how many distinct notes are there, we may have started with a couple of hundred. By the time you get the similarities handled, maybe there's 30 ideas out there. And I would give people four or five, maybe six dots and say, vote the dots on these 30 items. Which ones matter most? And invariably, like 95% of the time, there's a top four. And by top four, I mean, you'll see votes of it's 39, 38, 36, 35, 15. I mean, it's this market break. And I'll ask the group, if we do these four things right, is that what's going to solve the problem? And if they agreed, we would go with it. If they didn't, we talk about it. But everyone's going to walk out of the room with, here are the four things we need to keep our eyes on. This is how you manage change. Because the circumstances come in, how does it affect the four things that are important to get us to the goal? And what do I need to do to adapt to make it happen? And that's the conversation we need to have. Everybody in an organization should know what the most important things are. When I did this in a business context, if you walked off our elevators, you knew the four most important things because we had color-coded charts hanging on the walls with measures of them so that and we color-coded them, blue, green, yellow, and red. And so if people walked off and said red numbers, you didn't have to call a meeting. They were going to organize among themselves. What do we have to do to get that to yellow or green or blue? And and this enables the self-management that's necessary to make those adaptations. So, and then finally, in terms of actually working the tactics, let the people doing the work make their own tactical decisions. They can do a better job at it. Nobody knows the tactics better than the people doing the tactical work. But the leaders have to give them the goal, and they got to provide those 4 or 5 most important things that allow that connectivity for adaptation.
So we've walked through for almost 40 minutes the benefits of this, and obviously some great benefits to that. How would you advise a leader that wants to transition from a traditional hierarchical structure to begin to adopt this this model? Where do they start? How quickly can it effectively be done? And what should they be thinking about as far as a timeline to make the transition?
I think divide your team into teams. When you get people together, don't have a broadcast session. Don't start out with a broadcast session where you're telling, X number of people what to do. If you've got 40 people in the room, divide them into about 4 or 5 groups and say, here's the problem we're going to work on. What are your thoughts before we get started? Or you might have somebody give a basic introduction for about 20 minutes, just an overview of the problem, not the solution, just an overview of the problem. And before we get into solutions, I want your ideas, okay? And the importance of breaking people into groups is you get different perspectives on an idea. Too often in top-down structures, as you pointed out earlier in the session, if the leader says this is important and this is what I think, everybody says, well, I better get in line with that. But if the leader doesn't tell them, I encourage leaders, don't tell them what you think. Don't even give a hint of what solution you think is going to work best. And be prepared to be surprised because you may hear an idea from one of those tables that just blows you away. And you'll say to yourself, boy, I'm glad I didn't tell them what I was thinking because that is a far better idea. And you know these far better ideas because you see the electricity in the room just light up. And I've seen that happen, and that's very, very powerful. And so I think getting people's voices involved. And then what you have to do is you have to keep an eye on time. Everybody is working in a time context. We don't have forever to do things. We have to solve problems, come up with the best solution, and we have to do it within a time context. That certainly was a situation that pilots are facing. Every time they're in a situation, they don't have all the time in the world. And that's why this model is very effective. They've got to get the best thinking forward as quickly as they can. So that's the type of focus I think a leader should take.
when we think about leadership, one of the and you mentioned earlier about the disengagement, and I think that number might even be low. It's easy to find disengaged people. It's also easy, and again, this is the business spy side, to go around and talk to people who are working lower subordinate in the organization who have no idea when their next promotion is, aren't being mentored in any way that allows them to grow. They've just sort of been locked on station. If Ken and I are in a battle for the vice presidency of operations in a company, and Ken gets the job, hey, congratulations, Ken. It's uncommon. It is rare that the business says, you know what, Pete, you didn't get the VP thing, but we have something else for you because we want to make sure you understand how close this was and how we think we can put you to more use. So it's also a promotion. You never see that. So now Pete, the failed VP, has to go, hey, thanks for having me here for 20 years. All this time and effort, all of this, love that we were apparently, and now I got to go because I'm not in your guys' future plans. Or I stay. Oh, and that's even worse.
It's, I one of the things that jumps out is how naturally we think hierarchically.
Yeah.
In the three organizations that I focus on in the book, they don't have these titles. And that's a big transition for workers because you're paid for what you do, and anybody has the ability to do. And compensation is looked in terms of what are you accomplishing in the field, not what role do you have internally. And one of the dangers of bureaucracies is they get lost up in their internal mechanics, which a lot of times have nothing to do with external realities. Now, I think probably the best people don't worry about titles so much. They worry about getting the job done. And I think as a consequence, in a bureaucratic organization, they're kind of inadvertently going to wind up getting promoted, not because they were focused on, well, I'm going to do whatever I can to get in that next job, but they took the attitude, I'm going to do whatever I can to get the job done. I don't give a damn about titles. And all of a sudden, people are handing them titles because they're exhibiting real and true leadership. And I think I would suspect that if you look around your organizations at the people who are getting the titles, I would be willing to bet you that far more of them are getting them because of what they do rather than who they know. There are people getting it because of the political game and who they know. But I bet certainly your best ones are the ones who said, I didn't focus on this title. I focused on getting the job done, and the titles came after that. And people, the other thing I would be willing to bet, people want to work for them. They want to work for them for sure.
Yeah.
You know, as I've thought back as a military historian, at least at the amateur level, thinking back as, do I know of any times that this has been successful? Uh, and one of the models that I don't know if you've looked at or not, that it makes me harken back to was the early organization of the Marine Raiders during World War II, where they adopted the gung ho motto and the got rid of all the ranks and the titles within the organization and everybody being able to do everything. So yeah, there is military application to this. I think, unfortunately, there's always going to be that hesitancy within a uh, organization that has not been able to eliminate the titles like you talk about, especially in the military, where we literally wear our position and our place in that position on our sleeve, literally in a literal sense. Not that it's on our business card or on the door, but we walk around with, that this is my rank, this is my job, my sleeve. I think that there's going to be a certain amount, at least in the bigger organization, of pushback in that. But I can see where the problem solving process that you talk about, when you get amongst the group and you close the door and you put those things aside, is extremely effective. And the most junior guy might have the best idea because he has not yet been tainted by that organizational structure and that hierarchical structure as it exists. So they are able to think outside the box. In your talks with General McChrystal, how far and wide and how deep was he able to affect those changes within the organization, and have they outlasted him now that he's retired and moved on to other things? Do they still exist in those organizations?
Outlast, and I don't have insight into that. I read his book, and I was extremely impressed with how he adapted this model within the context where he worked. And I was extremely impressed with his understanding of what leadership looks like. He himself was an excellent facilitator of large numbers of people, uh, and I think extremely successful in the field. And based on what you described before, we're never going to eliminate power over. What we want to do is we want power to typically be more about power with than it is about power over. There are always going to be police in any society. We're not going to eliminate that. But we don't want to live in police societies. We don't want to live where the Chinese Communist Party, for example, wants to take AI. Their goal is we're going to know everything about everyone all the time. And in that case, we will have absolute power over you. We will control whether you have access to funds or not based upon how compliant you are. All right. We don't want to live in a world like that. We do want to live in a world where the police are making sure people are keeping the rules and not breaking the rules, but it should be minimal. But power, fundamentally, in any group where it works well, is about power with. It's about building teams. It's about focusing on goals. It's about getting things done. And that's another interesting thing is this big argument over what motivates people more in corporations. Is it money, okay, or is it recognition? And it turns out it's neither of those two. The thing that motivates people most is very simple: getting things done. People have a high need to accomplish results. That's more important than personal recognition. It's even more important than money. And I saw that happen. I watched people turn down higher office because they just weren't going to leave this work context. This was a great place to be. We had a very low turnover rate in our organization, very low, because it's rare for people to be in a situation where it's really fun to come every day, work with the people. We have the power to get things done, and we do it. We get it done. That means a lot.
Yeah, that's great. Let me ask the obvious question here. Pete would say, and I'm going to be unfair, but that's why we're having this question in this conversation. Every general that I know from the modern wars is O for their career. So, yes, organizationally, very progressive, very, successful when you look internally at the thing working. They lost. They didn't see what the fight was. They didn't provision the fight, and we, maybe you could qualify Iraq into a draw. So when we say that, we see it on the grand scale, and I would say this stands face, but it didn't work. It didn't work, right? As great as they were, as great as he was as a leader, failed.
You're looking at different dimensions of issues. He was able to affect the space in which he had to work. There are a lot of questions about the larger strategic strategy that was set essentially by politicians. And every military organization is operating within the context of a larger politics. Corporations don't have to deal with that in the same way that I think the military does. Corporations aren't totally devoid of politics, but we certainly saw Elon Musk, for example, said, I'm going to buy X and I'm going to throw out the politics of the prior administration and stop the censoring of people. So one of the most important things about network management is you don't censor anybody, because once you start censoring people, then you are just magnifying unconscious biases and giving them lots of life. Because it was a private sector enterprise, Elon Musk could say, I'm going to thumb my nose at the president of the United States. I got the money, I'm going to buy X, and I'm going to stop the government's censorship. So that type of authority exists within the corporate world. That's not a luxury that people in the military world necessarily have. But I think anybody can adapt these attitudes to the extent they can within the context they find themselves. That's certainly what I did when I worked within the corporate world. You look for the space where it could work and you do the best you can.
So all of us have, as leaders, have encountered this specific personality type, the disruptive personality type, the person that always wants to be heard, that wants to dominate conversations, regardless of what their level is within the organization. What would be some of the tactics in a networking type uh, structure that you overcome that challenge of the disruptor within your group as you're trying to build a collaborative process?
On
Got no
notes.
volume. There you go.
Okay. You can break into smaller groups. That's an interesting idea. And you can, as a facilitator, say, let me recap what you just said. Did I get that right? Okay, now, and move on to other people. I remember a session very, very well where I had a person just like you described, and she wanted to dominate everybody. And I used that tactic. I said, "Are you saying this because I want to acknowledge it?" Good. And I went on to other people, and then I put them in groups and so forth. And I was able to manage the extent of her participation, and it took work. And I was stunned at the end of the second day when she said, "Boy, I really got a lot out of this session, and I really appreciated it." And I thought, I'm somewhat surprised. And she also liked the ideas that came from other people. But you do have to manage those. Another thing as a leader you keep an eye on is the extroverts in the group will always tell you what they think. They're not necessarily the smartest people in the group. They're just the ones most comfortable. Oftentimes, your most intelligent people are the introverts who will not get engaged in the riffraff at all. And I think you do want to break people into smaller groups. They're more introverts are more likely to speak up in groups of maybe 4 to 6 people. They're not going to push back against loud voices in a group of 40 or 50 people. And or again, you can have people fill out notes, put them on walls. Okay, and you can also begin to invite people in. I notice you seem to be thinking about this. What are your thoughts on this idea? We'd like to hear it. Oftentimes, introverts have to be invited in, but my experience has been that introverts oftentimes are really, really very clear thinkers. I'm not saying that extroverts aren't, but I've often found that the most vocal extroverts oftentimes are not necessarily the smartest people in the group. They may be smart, and they tend to be experts on the way things are, and they want to keep reminding people of that. And if you're trying to get new ideas, then you need to have them come from different places. Being a facilitative leader is not an easy job, and in some ways it's more difficult. You have to have an appetite for chaos, and you have to actually create it and constructively do it. Then you have to hold it. You have to hold a group through it. You have to provide them the sense of safety. As chaotic as this is, we're going to solve this, and you create that presence personally. So it requires a sense of authority, but not in the context of power over, but in the context of power with.
Oh, that's good. Ken, let's wrap this up. Do you have anything you want to go through with Rod before we finalize things?
I think obviously that this is being successful and this model seems to work. And I would encourage anybody that has a chance to listen, as I will, to get Rod's book and do some deeper study. I mean, Pete has done more to sell books on his podcast to me specifically than anybody else in recent history. And there probably isn't a book that Pete's talked about with somebody that I haven't purchased, and they've all been well worthwhile. So I would encourage people to do that as I'm going to when we get done with that. Um, I like the disruption model. I think you have to be a disruptor and disrupt the status quo and make it work. And you also have to adapt your leadership style to the audience that you're working with. My leadership style when I was leading soldiers is different than my leadership style when I was leading volunteer firefighters. Both of them I was leading into life and death situations potentially, but I had to lead them differently to accomplish the same thing. So a good leader has to be adaptive, has to be willing to try new things. And I love the concept of the ambiguity and being able to live with chaos, because being able to live with chaos is life. Life is chaos. You mentioned it early on in a little different words than we usually say it, but no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy.
No,
And
yeah.
no business plan survives the first customer that walks through the door.
That's right.
So being adaptable and being those things, I think, is key. So I've learned a lot today. I hope that those that have the opportunity to listen to this take the same value out of us that I do. And I look forward to maybe some future conversations. And after I read your book, hitting you up with some questions on it. So thanks, Rod. Appreciate it.
Now I'll do my job. Hey, everybody. That's Rod Collins. He's sitting right over there. Here is the link for his website. Ding, ding, ding. You see it down below. Actually, it's over here. Ding, ding, ding. And you want to go there, rodcollins.net. And then the book, among other books, but this is the one we're going to talk about right now, is Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. And you know what I always say, and I mean this. I say it because it's clever, but also it's a good thing to do. Buddy read, buy two, and then collaborate, because if you do that, you're going to get more out of this book, and so will your partner that you read it with. And if nothing else, just go and leave a review. Leaving a review multiplies the ability for Rod to sell books. If you like a book, any book, review that book. And also don't forget, giving season, books make great gifts. So I'll say that. I'm going to bring Rod into the big window here and let him wrap it up. Thank you, Rod, for coming on the show with us.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this format, talking with the both of you. This is a little different than I've done, and this was a lot of fun. And thank you both for a good conversation. I really enjoyed it.
I love it. Yeah, you survived talking to a couple of spies, right? Not that scary. We're not. All right.
I was born
Everybody
in
have
Brooklyn, so I understand.
Yeah, we're not scaring you. All right, so I will see you all tomorrow. Rod will say goodbye to you in a second. Ken, thank you. Everybody else, tomorrow you will talk to me. Look for us all on the social media. You all know what to do. All right.